All right, welcome back. Episode 3 of Turn Bark Time. I'm the Turn.
I'm Bark.
And we're still here for a long time. So again, we just got word from Jay Inslee for Washington State that we are going to be in kind of a stay in our homes, stay safe kind of deal. So we're going to be pumping out these videos and just seeing what takes and what people want to see. We told you last week that our topic is going to be the Boston Massacre and the inaccuracies that we see a lot of when studying this famous pre-revolution event.
Okay, so this is the image that everybody's familiar with, the etching done by Paul Revere shortly after the event. So we wanted to talk about the actual Boston Massacre, the event itself, before we started talking about the picture. So it happened on March 5th, 1770, and it's in a lot of American textbooks, it's put as a reaction to the Townshend Act, which put a tax on a lot of goods that were being imported from Britain to the colonists, which pretty much everything, the whole point of colonialism and mercantilism was for Britain to sell things to the colonists so they could make money.
But fun fact real quick is Charles Townshend is the Prime Minister of England at this time, and he's actually called Champagne Charlie because he's known for frequently getting drunk during parliamentary meetings. I always thought that was kind of a fun thing to tell my classes. And so could you imagine this guy just drunk? He's like, we're going to tax them. Everybody's going to pay for it.
What are they going to do about it? So leading up to this, the taxation after the French and Indian War had led to animosity between the colonists and the British soldiers. And so actually, this was kind of news to both of us as we were researching this. There was actually Sons of Liberty had a rally / mob outside of a custom official's house. And they were throwing rocks at the windows and whatnot. And the person, Ebenezer Richardson, who owned the home, after they broke a window, shot out the window and ended up killing an 11-year-old protester about 2 weeks before the events of the Boston Massacre. So we like to say that the Boston Massacre was like the spark that ignited everything, but there was definitely animosity and ill feelings going around in Boston prior to that event.
And Samuel Adams took huge advantage of this event. The child's name was Christopher Sider, and again he's shot in the arm and the chest and eventually mortally wounded and dies from his wounds. They hold a funeral for this young man where over 2,000 people show up. And again, obviously, a child dying, really big deal, but this is also a political statement. It's an attempt to try and turn the tide for neutralists, people who have been kind of on the fence about Great Britain, and they see this, oh my God, they shot a kid? When will it end? And so people show up to this funeral. It becomes almost like a mini political protest as well. So
11 days after the funeral, there's a wig maker's apprentice who was owed money by an officer, and he essentially kind of harasses the officer like, hey, when am I going to get paid? And a soldier named
Hugh White
kind of steps in and tells the wig maker apprentice to leave the captain alone. It ends up actually, according to historical accounts, he hits the kid with the butt of his rifle. And at that point, that apprentice leaves and then comes back, and that's kind of where we always kind of pick up the story where there was a crowd of angry people yelling at the guard in front of the custom house. Well, this is kind of why they were yelling at that guard in front of the custom house.
And so one of the things we like to reference when we teach our classes is there is a great HBO special on John Adams. And it's really good to kind of give kids a visualization. And we show them, and they reference different points. They talk about wanting the kid, harassing him, but teasing him, telling him hey, empty my poop bucket, throwing snowballs at him, mimicking them. And this was actually a lot more confrontational. And again, the crowd gets bigger and bigger and bigger as this goes on, to the point where you're talking about a 1 armed soldier. Again, we're talking muskets back in the day, so we got one ball in there. You're not going to kill 50 people with one shot, so you don't feel that safe. And so he kind of retreats back to the square, and again, he's alerted a guard. The officer at the time is Captain Thomas Preston, and he alerts and sends, I believe it's 6 grenadiers, which are the guys, if you've ever seen like old-timey shows, they have the big straight-up hats, and they make formation in the square. They're loaded, they have their bayonets fixed, and again, the people are continuing to harass them and drive them to the point where they're actually throwing objects, and those objects are clubs, ice, oyster shells. If you've ever seen oysters or anything like that, you know that they're sharp on the outside. I've burned my hands on them, along with cutting my hands, pulling them off the barbecue. So it's not a good situation that we're in.
Interesting fact. Under British law, there was actually something called the Riot Act. So it's kind of a turn of phrase that we use where somebody reads you the Riot Act. It technically actually is a real law, or it was, where they would actually say, you guys are an unlawful assembly of people. You're a riot. You have an hour, go home, or else. Then it essentially like pulled the gloves off for the soldiers to put down riots. And they actually used it domestically. I want to say in Manchester, to put down like a workers' uprising rather roughly and with very little kind of repercussions for the soldiers. But anyway, Captain Preston has a conversation with one of the Bostonians, and at that point, one of the soldiers is struck with a club and like falls to the ground, and his musket goes off. And the whole time, people in the crowd are yelling, "Why don't you guys fire? You guys are chicken. Like, you won't fire." You know, so there's lots of people saying the word fire, where the Sons of Liberty are going to say that Captain Preston gave the order to fire. And, you know, that's one of the things that's very pivotal in the court case is who gave the order to fire. And so, like, I guess we'll start talking about the picture right now. What you see in the picture is that one of the biggest discrepancies is Captain Preston, who's kind of right behind my head with the sword, is behind his men, where we actually know in historical fact that he was in front of the men, which would make very little sense to order your men to fire when you were in front of them. Like a consistent, organized volley.
And one of the big things here is that, like I described, since we are talking about the picture now, take a look at the crowd. Unarmed, you know, just basically getting blown away, and no looking like they're attacking the soldiers or have anything like that. I also like to point out, because my students point this out every freaking time, there's a dog in the picture. So if you look down at the bottom of the picture, there is a dog. Yes, it's there. But again, the historical inaccuracy huge here is that Captain Preston is currently behind his men. And if you look at the stance he is, it's that traditional British fire, right? Like you're talking about cannons or guns or whatever. That's kind of how that stance is taken. Court case goes down. John Adams, so our second president, first vice president of the United States, second president of the United States, actually is the lawyer who defends the British soldiers, and gets all of them acquitted but two. Two of them are charged with manslaughter, which, if I understand correctly, is you killed somebody accidentally. And they are branded on their right thumb with an M. So for the rest of their life, people know that they accidentally killed somebody.
They should have actually been sentenced way more severely, but there was a loophole in the law called, it's the benefit of clergy. And it comes from back in the 1200s. It used to be given where if a priest were put on trial for something, they would go to a religious court. And then it became, if you were literate, you could get branded instead of actually being punished really severely, because English law was like the hammer when you did anything wrong. And so this was, if you were wealthy and literate, which was very uncommon, you could say the 51st Psalm or read it, and then you would get a lesser sentence. And by the time we get to the 1700s, you just have to recite it. And so if you know that loophole, which they eventually get rid of it very shortly after the turn of the century, because essentially every every thief, every criminal learns it because he knows that he can use it to get a lesser sentence. So, and that leads to more animosity between the colonists and the soldiers, because they feel like the soldiers are essentially kind of abusing the system, in the same way that, like, when, like, O.J. Simpson went to trial, they were like, oh, if he didn't have Johnny Cochran at the glove doesn't fit, he must have quit, like, if he didn't have such a good lawyer, he probably would have, been found guilty of the murder criminally. Sorry, random fact.
So again, we're talking about this. The problem that Barker and I see with this is that this image is used in every single American history textbook. At least it feels that way, because obviously someone's going to come and try and prove me wrong. But this engraving by Paul Revere is, people think like this is gospel, and it's not. This is propaganda by definition. Paul Revere is a member of the Sons of Liberty, and he will paint this image or engrave this image to try and sway again those neutralist parties that the British are horrific people. And so what we did was we said, why is this, here? And we can't really come up with an answer. The only answer we can come up with is that it's the way it's been. And that's, as long as we as teachers are acknowledging that this exists as propaganda. This is not how it went down. Like, don't look at this image and be like, oh, that's how the Boston Massacre happened, because it's not.
Well, even the fact that we still use the term massacre, I think the British refer to it as the incident on King Street. And one of the other things about the image is that all the colonists are depicted as being upper class, wealthier people, when in fact they were some of the poorest, laborers and rope makers, which isn't a very sexy job to have at that time. It's just as fun as it sounds. But that's another thing, is it shows them mowing down like the aristocracy, which when you're sending this out to like the southern colonies where it's full of, rich white planters, they're going to identify with that a lot better than if you put up the, the poor people of Boston.
So what we did was, like, and obviously one of the big things that we've looked at and studied that we'll always say is Crispus Attucks is an African-American who's actually leading kind of the group at the time of the incident where the soldiers fired. And he is one of the first people killed, struck with a bullet through the chest, and he dies instantly. And I feel like a lot of places are starting to bring this up. You can see in this image down in the corner, they have an African-American gentleman. He's the only one painted there. And as we'll see, other images will also enforce this. Again, obviously, it wasn't colored at the time of the print. It was just news. It was put in newspapers and things like that. And so African-American is not as identifiable in that image. So do you want to go ahead and jump us over to the next one?
Yeah. So this image comes from William Champy, and it's made in 1856. Like, there's not a whole lot of images. I think we used the Paul Revere image because it came out. It's pretty close to the actual historical event. But anytime that we're looking at some sort of artistic reproduction, we should be really mindful of the bias of the painter or of the artist, and what are they trying to get us to feel when they create a piece of art. So, like Turner was talking about, you got Crispus Attucks here in the right front and center. He was shot twice in the chest, 8 inches apart. And so they're trying to depict that here. You have a better image in the sense that you have a soldier who's been knocked to the ground, maybe. But again, they're supposed to be in a semicircle up against the customs building. And right now it gives the impression that there's kind of this pell-mell, like large scale, riot going on, instead of, I think 8 soldiers versus, 50 or more Bostonians.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned Bostonians are now holding clubs, so that's a little bit better. Like, we're increasing like the accountability of the Bostonians. Like, this is not, I mean, as un-American as it's going to sound, this is a legit like riot in which, in today's language, we would shut this down. We would expect police to come out and control these people. But again, when it's an us versus them mentality, we're trying to be patriotic. We always look at this as like, oh man, like they attacked these, clubs and stuff like that. They have guns. But again, 8 versus it's the number ranges from 50 to about 200 people. And again, one shot, it's not, the crowd could easily overwhelm you. Again, they do a good job of putting kind of a more surrounded aspect. There are people that were considered not behind them, like attacking them, but there were people milling about in the street wondering what was going on, because one of the things they did was people rang fire bells or church bells at night, and that signaled a fire. And so people would come out of their homes like, what the frick is going on, and trying to like help with these fires, and there's no fire. They're just trying to get more people to make it more intimidating for these soldiers. So we like this picture, but still not 100%.
Not the best.
No. So last picture we have here, Alonzo Chapel, 1868. So we're after the American Civil War, and a little bit different viewpoint here.
One of the best things about this image that we kind of like is the fact that it shows how tight the British soldiers would have been. They didn't have all this ample space to line up like they would in a Napoleonic battle, and where you put your soldiers shoulder to shoulder and you all line up and you will fire in mass. It has Captain Preston out in front, kind of isolated from his men there a little bit, and it does show a great number of Americans, I guess colonists, kind of being aggressive with the British. And being that this is a post-Civil War piece of art, you might be kind of trying to ring the bell of patriotism in the sense of like, we weren't going to stand up to tyranny in the same way that we just, stood up to another kind of injustice. So, you always kind of take that with a grain of salt when you're looking at this. It's not perfect, though, because you do see there is a soldier who's about ready to bayonet. There's a colonist laying there on the ground, and the soldier's about ready to run him through, which none of the people who were, I think there was, 5 people that died?
Five deaths.
5 deaths, 6 injured, and nobody was stabbed with a bayonet. The bayonet was essentially just to keep people at bay. Humans don't like sharp, pointy objects. We poke holes and we leak. So that was the whole point of that. And when they fired their weapons, it wasn't necessarily to try and kill people. It was more to essentially just to scare people and get them to run away, just like you would do with like wild animals.
Right. And you can see, I think Barker's head's blocking. Chris Patak is on the ground, I believe. Yeah. But again, notice now we don't have a really big depiction of color here. Right. And again, obviously black and white painting, but no, you could tell who's white, and if there was a person of color in there, what the difference between the two, and there isn't in this one. So another reason why we could have another image. And so we've kind of done this, and you can do this for multiple images. My favorite actually is to do this at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, where we show these heroic patriots standing up to the British Army, when really what happened was once the British shot, everyone was like, I'm out, peace. Maybe got one shot off and was like, nope, not happening, and ran away. And we see these heroic pictures at the beginning, but as history progresses and we learn more, we look at it and we say, nope, that's not really how it went down. This is what we take, and we're going to actually paint the real image. So anything to add, Barker, on this one?
So, it goes to show that just because something is a primary source in the sense that it was created close to an event doesn't necessarily mean that it's an accurate depiction of what was happening, especially when we're dealing with events that predate photography and film. Not saying that photography and film are infallible, but when you're making drawings or paintings, there's definitely a lot more that goes into them. Like when we look at John Trumbull paintings of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it looks pretty darn majestic, and magically everybody's face is in the picture. Didn't happen that way. I always tell the kids, it's not like you're at Chuck E. Cheese and somebody comes up and says, smile, and takes a picture. They didn't have everybody sit in Congress for a day holding a pose so that he could sketch everybody in.
Yeah. So again, this is our take on the Boston Massacre and the inaccuracies that are displayed in media and things like that. Next time, we are going to take on World War II as a topic suggested by Miss Chloe Shields. And so we're going to take on a part of World War II, and we have decided that we're going to discuss next time the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which is the all-Japanese American unit during World War II that fought in Germany. They are considered the most decorated unit in military history. Until then, I'm Turn.
I'm Bark.
And we're going to be here for a long time. Hey, good night, everybody.
Stay safe.
Yep, and be well.